So to repair this landing gear base part, I think I'm just going to dollop some PVA glue around the place and poke it back in and hope for the best. There was a comment in that last video that said it looked like the glue joints had actually broken instead of breaking the wood, which is unusual for wood glue because usually the wood itself will break. But when you take a closer look at it, there's only a few spots where it wasn't the wood itself that broke. Like I think that one right about there, or even there's a bit of wood from the other side. So for the most part, and that, oh, is it that one? Well, anyway, but that is something to consider though, because I heard that PVA doesn't glue to itself very well, so you ideally want to be gluing wood to wood rather than wood to the old PVA. So anyway, I'm just going to stick it in and hope for the best. Okay, it's a few days later now, the glue's all dried up and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It's almost like nothing's changed really. I mean, there's a little bit of messy pieces here and on the inside there, but as far as the structural integrity goes, I don't think it's changed at all, so quite happy with that. So I did a little bit of shopping, bought some hinges and some springs. So what I'm thinking I might do is I'll try and reuse this part of it anyway, and what I'll do is I'll cut it in the middle, or maybe cut a section out of the middle there, and I'll also cut off the bottom part of it up to about here. Alright, well I've cut these pieces of carbon fibre like this, but I've changed my mind now because it turns out it's not really going to give me the geometry that I wanted. So as I have this sitting in the vise here, you'll see that the bottom there is vertical, so that's where the wheel will be vertical. And if we look up at the top there, so this point here will be the bottom corner of the fuselage, and the wheel is only going to be about 10 centimeters outside of the side of the fuselage, which is not much, and this is when it's on the ground and level. I think if you could land it carefully it might be okay, but I just don't really like that idea a whole lot. So I've thought about this a bit more, and I'm going to try plan B, which was sort of plan A actually, but I thought I might get away without having to do so much work if I tried it with this one. Anyway, plan B is to use some of these 12mm wrapped carbon fibre tubes and these nifty little clamps that you can get from Hobby King that make it quite easy to attach flat plates to them like that. So I will show the CAD diagram of this on screen before you now, just for a moment. There we go. But it's going to work so that you have this piece at the bottom where the wheel joins on, and this is going to have to be bent. This is going to be an aluminium plate and it needs to be fairly sturdy, so I'm going to use this 3mm plate that I got for free from the metal shop in Morrinsville last year. They just gave it to me. I'm not really sure what it is, but they make boats and trailers at that place, so it's probably, could be some sort of marine aluminium, I don't know. But the reason why I didn't go for this straight away is because I'm going to have to bend this, and not much of a bend really, just a little bit there. It's going to have to bend about 45 degrees. But I wasn't sure if that would work out very well, whether you have to heat it up or whatever, so I'll give it a try and hopefully it'll be alright. So at the top, this is where it will join onto the fuselage. I've drawn another plate there, which I could make out of aluminium, but I could also probably just put those holes that I need into this, because they don't, those holes don't get in the way of the other holes that are already there, and then I could just cut this off, I think. Well, like I say, I don't know exactly what type of alloy of aluminium this is, but I might have to find out because it's really, really nice to work with. It drills easily, files easily. The hacksaw blew right through it. I was quite surprised because I always have this image of hacksawing aluminium being a pain in the ass, but this was not at all. Just very easy. It kind of reminds me of working with wood actually. So it's a pity that I've had this plate sitting around for so long and I've never touched it, but the reason was because I thought it would be the same as this rubbish that you get from Mitre 10. Oh look, I'm calling it rubbish already. But the problem with that is when you start to grind it or drill it or something, it sort of feels like it's a little bit liquefied almost. It's like a very, very solid jelly almost, whereas this kind of reminded me of sandstone actually, the way, I don't know if you've ever held sandstone, you can sort of rub it and it just sort of brushes off into a powder. and yeah, very easy to deal with. It's got a grain on it, a bit like almost like a wood grain there. It's a bit hard to get the reflection right, but the grain, oh, it's not a grain, but it looks like the same kind of grain that you get on plywood almost. So I'm thinking maybe I'll try doing some CNC milling of this stuff, because that was the other reason I never really did much aluminium on my CNC machine, because it was just so horrible to work with. But I think I was supposed to be using something like this, so I might give it another try. However, having said that, one of the things that I wanted to do with this piece is bend it, and I think that for that purpose this kind of material is probably worse than the jelly. But anyway, I'm going to try heating it a little bit. I think this is probably going to help. I got this little lighter burner thing. Unfortunately, I got this in Japan, and the shape of the lighter that fits in it, I don't think we can get these in New Zealand, so I'm just going to have to make do with that little bit of fuel there. And I'm just going to heat it up there, and unfortunately this is a massive heat sink here, but can't be helped. And then I'm just going to put a bit of wood against it and hit it with a hammer. So a lot of not ideal things going on here, but it doesn't matter too much if it I was going to say if it breaks. No, it matters if it breaks, but we don't have to get it perfect. Another thing I found out, I just had a quick look on the internet about this grain, and Murphy's Law, of course, says that I've got it the wrong way around. Apparently it's actually stronger along the grain that way, which is how I would want to have it, the grain going that way actually. But anyway, let's just see what happens. Okay, so that's that done. Didn't really have any problems with it. This lighter I don't think really made any difference. It just doesn't put out enough heat. I wouldn't have done that, by the way, if I was bending any more than 45 degrees or so. It's just that because this bend is fairly shallow, I thought I'd give it a try and would probably be safe. Okay, so that's all the bits made there now. Just have to put it all together. So this is what one side will look like when it's stuck onto the plane, and it's quite easy to adjust where it's going to stop when it falls there, because the reason it's stopping is because the carbon fibre pipe is hitting the bottom there, so it's coming around like this, and then you can see I can't rotate that any further than where the pipe hits there, and it's quite easy to adjust that because you just push the pipe up, and then you loosen these screws a little bit, and then you just push down on it slowly until you get it to exactly where you want, and then tighten those screws up. And where I want is just a little bit sort of toe in, not really toe in, but like sloping in a little bit, so that there's just a little bit of play, so that the vertical position is just a little bit above where it will go when it's flying, like that. One thing I don't like too much about that though is that there's a lot of leverage coming on here that might just push that back down. So what you could probably do to avoid that is make use of that little hole there that's in the aluminium bracket, put a little screw down there, and that should stop the pipe from sliding that way, hopefully. Okay, I have those on the plane now, and all of the screws and everything are mostly tightened up, and it goes up there quite nicely. What I'm thinking to do now, the last little step, is to put these on somehow, and I was thinking to copy the way that the Super Cub, or the planes that have this kind of arrangement, do it. And from what I've seen, they usually have a point fixed to the fuselage in the middle that's actually up a little bit or down a little bit, and they fix their springy bits on there, and that'll go out to about here somewhere, something like that. Okay, so that's that on there now, and it does work, but it's going to be way too weak, I think. Like, I feel like I'm barely putting 1 kilo of force on here, probably even less than a kilo, and that's already enough to start it bending. So that's just not going to cut it. So what I think I'll have to do is put this end of the spring maybe even halfway up. It might be quite tricky to mount it because it's going to have to be pulled quite strongly at the same time I'm trying to screw it together, but I'm sure I'll get it done somehow. Okay, I'm just doing a little test positioning of this block here further out on the arm. It's not going to stay there, I'll just have a piece of wood holding it in place. But as I do this, I'm starting to realise why this bush plane type suspension is usually arranged the way it is, with an extension or a piece out here to put the other end of the spring on, and this end of the spring closer to here, or not the spring itself, but where the spring will be acting was closer to the wheel itself, instead of the way I've done it. And it's a little bit tricky to explain here, so I'll go inside to the computer and show you what I mean. So here's a little diagram showing the current situation. The landing gear leg is pivoting around this point here, and the lines in red are the spring, shown in 3 different positions. And obviously the most effective way to grab hold of this green point here and move the arm would be if the spring was pulling at 90 degrees to the direction of rotation, or tangential to this curve. So if we could hook one end of the spring here and one end of the spring, say, out here at about 90 degrees to it and pull that way, that would be the most effective. But obviously we can't do that because we want to have some ground clearance still, so we've put it there. But the problem with this is that because this point's fairly close into here, and also because the angle between the leg and the spring is fairly shallow, the leg has a lot of leverage to pull that spring. So that means that you need to have quite a strong spring, or you need to put lots of tension, pre-tension on the spring at this point to make sure that when it moves down to here it's going to be strong enough. And as I was finding out before, it's quite tricky to pull that spring to the position where it needs to be. So a couple of ways we can improve this situation is obviously moving this point further out and moving this point further to our optimal position of the 90-degree angle over here. Obviously we can't put it there like we just said, but what we can do is what everybody does, and that is to have one end of the spring closer to the wheel. The other end will be sort of somewhere here. I've exaggerated this a little bit, I think, although I do notice that the line between the wheel and the opposite side of the bottom of the fuselage is almost a straight line in a lot of these bushplane suspension designs, so it's kind of what I've drawn here. Oh, and sorry, let's go back to this one for a second. The other problem with this situation is that the distance that the spring extends is not very much. So if you look at the center neutral position of 134 millimeters, this is to scale actually. So it's 13.5 centimeters there and about 14.5 centimeters there. So it's only extending the spring by 1 centimeter. That's why I said you have to put a lot of pre-tension on it to make sure that this 1 centimeter extension is going to be as strong, is going to have a lot of pull on the arm. But over here, we've changed from 23.5 to 26.5, so that's about 3 times as much extension on the spring for the same 30-degree rotation of the arm. So this is a 30-degree angle here, and the angle that it's pulling on the arm at is larger, so it's not the 90 degrees we want, obviously, but 25 is better than 18 that we had before, and the distance that it's out is a lot further too, so it's getting a lot more leverage that way as well. So I think this is what I'll go with. Haven't entirely decided how to arrange it, but I'm thinking I might just attach one end of the spring somewhere around here and then use some of that pull steel cable and crimping bits and pieces that I used for the elevator and the rudder connections, and just put a bit of steel cable from the end of the spring here to the wheel, and that should make it a little bit nicer to adjust and easier to adjust too, because at the moment I'm having to pull on that spring quite a bit, and as I discovered, the amount that I had to pull on the spring is actually already pulling the wheel inward a lot more than I had intended with my adjustments of this carbon fiber tube position. So all in all, this wasn't really working out too well. It might have worked, but I think we can do better. Okay, so that should be finished now. I have attached the springs to one of the holes that was already in here for the screws. It was just too convenient not to use it, so you can see it's going through there. Unfortunately, these springs did wobble around a bit, so I've put a zip tie around there just to make sure that it doesn't roll the other way around, because it was sort of, when you put tension on it, it sort of went boing down to this bottom position like that, which was kind of annoying. Not very cool. So that'll stop, the zip tie will stop it from doing that, and just in case this little hook does manage to come out of there, the zip tie should hopefully stop it from completely coming loose as well. So what I was saying about the tension on the springs, this situation is much nicer because there's just a bit of tension on there. It was much easier to set up, and could do with a bit more there, but it seems to be working okay. I was just rolling it around on the lawn and bouncing up and down this little concrete step there, and it seems to be quite nice, and it takes a lot more than 1 kilo of force. See how much more rigid that is than how I had it before. But I have yet to put the wings on and see what it performs like with the full weight, so I'll do that next. Oh, and speaking of weight, the bits that I removed weighed just over 200 grams, and what I've added weighs just over 340 grams, so it's about a 140 gram increase in weight, which is not really any big deal. From what I've seen so far, the plane should be able to carry quite a bit more. A little bit of it has gone behind the CG though, this bit here, which is a little bit of a bummer, but not too much. Well, unfortunately it's close but no cigar on this one. This is what happened when I wheeled it backwards and forwards gently, just a few times, probably only 3 times, with the full weight of the... Well, actually it's not the full weight, it's just the wing. So there would be batteries, possibly another 1.6 kilos of batteries in the front. Yeah, for today it's not going to be flyable, but that's alright because it's extremely windy lately, so I probably wouldn't have been flying it for a while anyway. But on the bright side, I think the only problem here is that the springs are too soft. So you might say, well, pre-tension them a bit more, like pull those cables really tight, and that should solve it, which is probably true, but I don't really want to have it so that when it's flying the springs are really pulling the wheels inward like that. I just don't think that's quite right. So what I'll do is, on my next shopping day, I'll go to the hardware store again and I'll get some springs that are a bit stiffer than that, and I'll just plop them in there and hopefully that will fix it, because I really like the way this was so easy to set up. Like when I was crimping those cables to close them tight, I could just sort of pull it hand tight and then hold it between my thumb and finger while I was crimping, and that was enough. So it's really quite easy to set up. So I think it's just the springs need replacing here. But anyway, I think we've seen all we need to see on the construction there. I'm not going to change anything from this point apart from the springs. So I think I'll just upload this video as is, and perhaps some of my viewers will give me some tips about maybe something that I could do that's a little bit better, or if I'm doing something wrong there. But I think it's just the springs. Anyway, that's going to do it for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.